Welcome to the Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. This podcast is designed to provide momentum in our God-given roles of leadership as we partner together to equip today's Christian leaders for tomorrow's opportunities. Whether you're a pastor, youth leader, ministry volunteer, parent, or student, we want to be your go-to and most trusted resource for equipping and encouragement when it comes to your ministry and leadership influence. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome back to another Momentum Ministry Partners podcast. I am excited about today's guest. She's actually been on the intro for the podcast episode already, so You've seen and heard her. It is none other than the one and only Bethany Miller, who just happens to be, what's your title? The Development Director at Rahab Ministries?
Yeah, Director of Development at Rahab Ministries.
Okay, awesome. You're also my wife.
I am. That's my other title.
So let's just get the cards on the table here.
Yeah.
I asked you to be on this episode today to talk to us about how churches can partner with local nonprofits.
Yeah.
Now, you've been through your career, you've actually wore a lot of different hats. And so I would love to kind of just introduce you maybe to our audience. Some people probably know you as having worked at Momentum. You worked at Momentum for almost 2 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
2 whole years?
Yeah, it was 2 years almost to the day. Yep. And so I've been on the podcast before, both as the intro and outro and as a guest during that time. So making my comeback here.
Yes, I love it. So you've worked, you started out your career after college in like social work.
Yep.
Did that for a while in Rhode Island.
Yeah, a year in Rhode Island and then a couple of years in New York working with primarily teenagers, at-risk youth and youth who are facing trouble. So, yeah.
And kind of in that season working alongside of local churches to a degree? Yes or no? Or remind me.
Not so much at that point. Again, I was more on the direct care side of things. So certainly there were some various faith ties, but I think those were really handled more by the administration. But towards the end of kind of that period of doing direct care social work, I was getting more involved in the administrative side and the leadership side and realized that I am more gifted at that side of things than the direct care side. But I really love my couple of years that I spent doing direct care work because it gave me such an appreciation for those who do it every day and just a huge respect for that.
Yeah. And then somewhere in there, you met a guy and moved to Maryland, a very handsome guy, and moved to Maryland. When we first met, you started working for, what was it, the Chamber of Commerce in Bethesda, Maryland, and you were there for quite a while.
Well, let me tell you what, I'll rewind a little bit.
Back up.
Social work, did that. And then I worked for an international nonprofit in their headquarters in New York first. So that was, and I bring that up just because that was where I first got into development work and really seeing fundraising with a wide variety of partners, individuals, companies, businesses, a whole wide variety of partners in that sense. Yes. And then I was there when I met you. And so, yes, then moved to Maryland, worked for a Chamber of Commerce, which is a different kind of nonprofit, but still nonprofit world, working with a lot of businesses. And so different in terms of fundraising. It wasn't necessarily philanthropic fundraising, but getting members to join the Chamber of Commerce, getting businesses to join as members and invest in the mission and the organization, certainly. Yeah.
And some churches would join the Chamber, right?
Yep. Yeah, we worked with churches and different nonprofits, both faith-based and not. So all varieties of organizations for sure.
Yeah. Now, while you were in New York and when we first met and were starting to date, you were actually helping plant a church. So you kind of have been on like different leadership teams of churches and then obviously getting to be a pastor's wife. You know, from my perspective, some of those things. I can speak into obviously the pastoral church, local church side, how in my 17 years of pastoral ministry at a local church, how we would partner with other local ministries and
Mhm.
nonprofits and all of that. So we our goal for this kind of conversation, and I want to get to kind of beyond that because I realize I'm skipping that. Where else you've worked and what you're currently doing now.
So we'll just really quick. I worked for
Yeah,
Habitat for Humanity for many years. That was really where I got super involved with fundraising. That's really where I kind of cut my teeth on this career of fundraising and marketing for nonprofits. And there did do a lot of partnership with churches. And then after we moved here, so that you could work for Momentum, we did not know that I was then also going to work for Momentum. But yes, worked for Momentum for 2 years. So obviously, a lot of church partnership in that role. And then just about a year and a half ago, moved back to kind of the local community nonprofit work, which is what I've kind of discovered is truly my heartbeat and love. And so, yes, working for Rahab Ministries, which we've been on your podcast before, another member of staff, but for anyone who's catching up, we serve those who've been affected by sex trafficking in Northeast Ohio. And we are a faith-based nonprofit. So we work with a lot of church partners and supporters. So that kind of
yeah.
catches us up to why I'm sitting here, how we
There
got
you
here.
go. Perfect. Thank you for catching us up to speed.
Try to nutshell
Yeah.
that.
Well, Bethany, I think it's kind of fun just because of the different hats that you've wore over the years and the different seats that you've been in, but primarily your heart for the local church. And so even getting to see as a pastor's wife and the different roles that you've had in all of the organizations that you've been a part of, like obviously as a Christ follower, you want to see the local church win and succeed and their strengths and weaknesses. And so you actually wear a unique hat. You have perspective in a lot of this partnership that local churches can have when working alongside ministries
Yeah.
and nonprofits within your community. And so, as Momentum seeks to partner with local churches all over the country and help churches
Mhm.
thrive and succeed and win, and we say all the time, we want this podcast and these conversations to be a go-to trusted resource. To that end, you say that in the intro.
I'm real familiar with the intro.
I saw that look come across your face. Like, yeah,
Your go-to trusted resource.
to that end, I think there are times where if we're honest, the reality is as local church pastors, we may see needs in our community that we're like, ooh, we should start a food bank. Ooh, we should go do a homeless outreach. Ooh, we could do build houses for local organizations. We could serve and meet needs in all these different ways. And
Mhm.
none of those are bad ideas,
Right.
but do your diligence and let's figure out, is somebody else in your community already doing that? And if
Sure.
so, are they doing that well? Can you
Sure.
partner with them? Can you come alongside of them? What are the other research? A lot of times churches aren't aware of some of the things that are in their local community that you could be partnering with to advance the gospel, to advance the kingdom, to meet physical needs in order to lead to meeting spiritual needs. So let's
Yeah.
kind of dive into this conversation here. And I'd love just to ask you your take from kind of both sides and all the different hats that you've wore and perspectives that you have.
Mhm.
Um, how can churches do this? How can they do it well? And maybe let's just start maybe with, to back it all the way up, what are some of the key steps that you see pastors could take to research the nonprofits and Christian ministries that might already be in their community?
Sure. I mean, the most obvious, Google them, right? Sure. If we as nonprofits are doing our job, and even if we're not marketing experts, hopefully we have a website. Hopefully we have some social media up, right? We should be getting our name out there about what we're doing. So Google is real easy on that front. But really, I think if you are looking for like-minded synergy between your church and local nonprofits, is I would say start talking to your people. Who are your congregants who are deeply involved in the community? For one, finding out maybe where they're involved, but also finding out what their heartbeat is. What are they concerned about in the community? What have they heard about? What issues have they heard about facing the community that they're concerned about and that they have a heart and a passion for? Because I'm sure we can dive further into this, but to me, it shouldn't always just be the pastor who's driving that, but it should be something that more of your church can embrace and be a part of, and as a body, work towards supporting a cause. So not just an organization, but what is the issue? So for us at Rahab, we're addressing sex trafficking. And when people hear about that cause, some people, not everybody, and that's okay, some people, their heart is stirred in such a way that they're like, I need to be a part of that. Well, many of those people might be sitting in your church, right? And so it needs to be not just driven by a pastor on Google, though that's sometimes a good way to just get some options, find out who's in your community. But really, I think so much of that is also, what are your people passionate about? And when you do present an idea, what kind of reaction do you see from the body within your church? Who's getting excited about it? Who's willing to get on board and help drive that forward? I think that's so key. And maybe that is feeding the homeless, right? Maybe homelessness is a big issue in your community, in which case you should be looking at that. But if it's a big issue in your community, there's also probably nonprofits who are working towards that end. And so, yes, looking for those that you can come alongside and partner with, and find some synergy in addressing that. I think there are other churches who sometimes there's some of those issues that are across the board. We know that I don't know of any community that doesn't deal with some level of poverty and homelessness, but it may be more pronounced in some areas. But for instance, even through my work at Rahab, I know of a church who started and planted themselves right in the middle of a part of a city where there is a lot of strip clubs and prostitution and things of that nature. I obviously know them because they partner with us really strongly. But they put themselves right there in that community because they want to be reaching out to people who are hurting in those areas. So we then become a natural partner, right? So again, I think looking for what's happening right where your church is, right in your own community, and what's stirring the hearts of the people in your church body that they can get excited about and be part of.
I love that. Yeah. Some of them, to your point, you may not know about. You may not even realize that there is maybe in your local community sex trafficking that's going on, and maybe there is actually an organization that's right around you who's doing that. I know
Yeah.
with Rahab, you guys are focused in Northeast Ohio.
Yeah.
And I did look. So episode 18 of season 3, if you're curious, because
There
some of
you
you
go.
might be going, oh, that strikes an interest with me.
Right.
You can go back and hear about, we interviewed your former boss, so
Yeah.
Jamie Blair, who is the former CEO of Rahab. And so we interviewed her, and she kind of explained how local churches can partner with, in terms of sex trafficking
Right.
in your
Our
community.
particular cause, for sure.
Yeah. And
And FYI, it is happening in your community. You can
that's
go back
exactly
to
what I was
the
going to say.
episode and listen to why I say that. But if you think it's not,
Yes.
that's inaccurate.
Yes. And
Yeah.
then we also have had other conversations with like Chris Russell at Destiny Rescue on a
Yeah.
global scale. So
Yeah.
local and then global.
Correct.
But one of the things that I remember when I was on staff at our church in Maryland, it was so helpful. We had, I don't know if it was a care deacon or somebody on our staff, but at one point they had made a list of all of the local Christian ministries that were in our community:
Mm-hmm.
biblical counseling, rescue missions,
Mm-hmm.
uh, Habitat for Humanity, all these. We had a whole list, and I actually kept it next to my phone in my office because it was so helpful to know when somebody would call or email and they'd ask, hey, we have, maybe it was a congregant, and they're like, we have a heart to do this. Could you connect us? Where could we plug in? Where could we serve?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be able to know quickly the name of the organization, their website, their contact information. There are a lot of times where churches are in ministry, you come across the people who need counseling, they need help, they
Mm-hmm.
need resources. Maybe they're homeless and they're down and out and they need a meal. And so they call the church. Praise God that they do that.
Right.
But I honestly, I viewed it as our responsibility, not always, not every time, to meet
Mm-hmm.
that need, but to connect them to another organization that could do that in a better way than we were
Right.
equipped to do that as a church.
Yeah.
So if I didn't know what those organizations were and even have a contact or who to talk to there,
Yeah.
if I didn't know them or trust them, that was a detriment in that circumstance or
Yeah.
situation. So for you, from your perspective as a local nonprofit
Hmm.
and Christian ministry,
Hmm.
what would you prefer? What's a dream scenario for a church that discovers Rahab to
Hmm.
come ask you questions or get to know you in order to partner together? What does that process look like?
Well, I think you just said what step one is, right?
Sure.
Call me and get to know me and get to know my organization to decide if it's worthy of partnership, right? So, like I said earlier, Google is free. Google's a great place to start, but please don't stop there, right?
Yeah.
So, I think partnership is done across the table. Partnership is done in conversation. Partnership is relationship, and I think that's part of us being the body of Christ, right? It's a little bit what you were getting at there of not all of us individually, or I think if we take that and look at it from an organizational perspective, not all of us are meant to do every single thing, and so letting people do the things they're best at. So as the local church, there's a lot of things that you're really good at that I'm not going to do, right? I'm not going to be good at. But as the nonprofit, I can be better at over here serving this particular issue, this particular population, doing this particular thing.
Mm.
Well, for you to at least understand what that thing is really key. And so when we sit down and have that conversation, I think we discover the ways, right? And it's not a cookie cutter. There is not just one way to partner. I will say, even in this current organization and others that I've worked for, we typically have a wide variety of churches. And I don't have to tell you or your audience that churches do not come in one shape and size.
Right.
And so big churches, smaller churches, rural churches, those in the city or in the suburb, if they're volunteer based or if they have a large staff, all of that changes the type of relationship that we can have. But we can't really discover that until we start having conversation, and figuring out what is it that your church would benefit from, right? And then also, what would we benefit from? Because if we're talking about partnership, it's not just a transactional relationship. That would not be a full partnership. We have churches who just write us a check. And if that's all they're capable of, my answer is thank you. Thank you very
Sure.
much, because we do need your financial support to do our work. But we have churches where we have formed really beautiful partnerships where churches are coming and thanking us for the partnership. And that to me says we're doing something right on our end. And likewise, we're thanking them for what they're doing. But all of that happens and starts with a conversation. And getting to know each other. And if you'd like, I can give you examples of ways that that's developed beyond that. But I just can't think of one that has existed in that really beautiful, flourishing partnership where we see both of our work advanced in the kingdom
Mm.
without having heartfelt conversation together.
So, Bethany, one of the things I think as you're saying that, if I put my local church pastor hat on,
Mm-hmm.
I'm immediately thinking vision, mission, alignment, right?
Mm-hmm.
A
Sure.
lot of times churches want to partner with other organizations that are Christian organizations or
Yeah.
that are going to further the mission of the church. And so what do you do if that may not be a direct fit right away?
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to that from your seat? And maybe I can kind of talk to it from a pastoral side.
Yeah, well, I think, at least on my side as a nonprofit, when a church approaches me and says, we want to talk about partnership or we want to get together and hear more about what you all are doing in the community, I don't ever read that as a guarantee, right? That's a beginning of that conversation that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. I think that's great to look for that kind of alignment. And if it works out, wonderful. And if not, I have to trust that the Lord is going to provide the right partnerships for my organization, and trust that you are going to pursue the right partnerships for your church. So there is a level of, too, we need to take off our own agendas, and look for the Lord's guidance and wisdom and discernment. If I'm, obviously I'm a fundraiser, so I think about it a lot of times from a fundraising perspective, and I have a budget to meet, but that's the Lord's, right? That if I am working unto him and working in his kingdom, I need to work strategically and with the best of my knowledge and gifts and abilities and strengths that he has given me, and trust that he will then provide for the work he has put in front of us to do. And so if your church is not that, there's no reason for me to be mad at you for that, right?
Yeah.
I would love the opportunity to have the conversation and see if it's an alignment. But you're right, it does have to be some shared alignment. I also think we need to be careful not to go too far down that road, in that we may differ on some things, right? And each organization and church is going to have to decide where that line is. What is this is the stuff that we have to agree on before we move forward. And here are some secondary issues that if we agree or not, well, that's, maybe not consequential to us being partners. So for us at Rahab, we have a statement of faith. We put it on our website. We have it available for anybody who would like to see it. And part of our statement of faith is that this is what we believe and this is what we're working towards, but that for one, we don't require our clients to adhere to the statement of faith. Our job is to love them where they are at. And so we are not requiring them. And to understand that there are going to be people who support our work in a variety of ways that may or may not agree with every single aspect. Now, for us, if you're going to work with our clients, you do have to agree to that statement of faith or be willing to stand by it in our program spaces. So we're getting into some of the nuance there. But I think the same can be true of your church, right? You need to look at what are your core values? What is your mission? What is your number one driving force in the kingdom the mission you feel like the Lord has put in front of you for your church? And so does that nonprofit align with that? Is there some alignment to get there? And if so, wonderful. But understand that, there might also be some secondary issues that you're not exactly in agreement on. Is that worth sacrificing the work that you can do for the kingdom? Especially when we're talking about nonprofits who are doing work with vulnerable populations and vulnerable people. Should we let our differences stop us from reaching those lost? Again, I think that's for each one to decide where that line is. But I think keeping in mind what's the end goal.
Yeah, that's really good. I like the perspective, and I would even challenge, like, define what your terms are when you say partnership, right?
Yeah.
So you brought up like the budget side and the financial contributions from a local church. That's great, right? We love that. But
Yes,
even from the from the church side, I think that's where you have to break that down a little bit of like, okay, is this an organization that we're going to partner with by, i.e., sending resources to them? Can we provide backpacks or meals or canned goods?
Money.
Money, sure.
Money.
But I'm saying, like, scalability, right? A church is not, you have to define what partnership means. And so for a church perspective, that could mean a lot of different tiers, a lot of different levels. And so maybe it's certainly just, hey, once a year, we're going to ask our people to provide backpacks for the back to school drive.
Yes.
Right. It may be the financial side of it. And so for churches, that you may have a tiered system of like, these are the local community organizations that we're going to invest financially in, but then maybe that might not mean you may not partner with them. There's other tiers or levels of partnership where you might say, no, we're so in line with the mission and vision and the values and your statement of faith, and you're actually helping further us and what we're doing as a church, that not only are we going to give money, but the third Thursday of every month, we're going to serve in the soup kitchen.
Yeah.
And
I'm going to push in on something real quick there, though, is that those types of service opportunities, be really careful where those are coming from. Because I have seen too many times in my career, not just churches. So this is not me picking on churches. This is churches, businesses, other organizations, we're going to support that nonprofit. And here's how we're going to do it. Let me tell you, sweet nonprofit, what we're going to do for you. And unfortunately, sometimes, when you and I have done international missions, we've talked about the when helping hurts when you go overseas and you're doing projects and things. Is it something that really benefits the community? That's true in your own community too, right? And so again, that conversation across the table, being willing to listen to what does that nonprofit really need, right? We do often need service projects. I do need people to put together outreach bags. When I worked at Habitat, I often needed groups to come serve on a job site and build. But I would get groups who would come and say, our service day is March 4th. Then I'm making them up, but like March 4th, and we're going to bring 50 people. And you go, gosh, we're looking at a construction schedule. We're doing electric on March 4th, and we don't ask volunteers to put in. We won't let volunteers put in electric. Yeah. And if you're building a Habitat house, it's not huge, so 50 people will overwhelm that space. And then you want me to give them all power tools? Like, where that sounded really great. It sounded like we want to bring a whole crew of people and do something really amazing. And I think the heart behind those types of things is often in the right place. But if you're not having conversations on the other side, sometimes you're pushing something onto a nonprofit that's not only not helpful, but detrimental, right? And then you're actually setting the nonprofit back. So how much work are they doing to help your church put something forward to show what great work you're doing that's not actually accomplishing great work and potentially distracting from the great work? Right. So again, I go back to that conversation. It has to start with conversation and understanding the organization and not coming in with your own agenda of what you expect to accomplish there, but saying, hey, organization, you were the one working in this field. You were the one you're working with homeless populations. You're working in places that have food scarcity. You're working in organizations who work with sex trafficking or building houses, whatever the case may be. Help us understand what your work is. Help us understand what you need. And then let's see if there's a way for the church to step into one of those needs and support it. Not coming with a hey, our church did this thing for the other nonprofit and it was great, so we're going to come do it for you. Well, for sure. It might not be a fit. So, yeah.
You're kind of starting to even speak into, I was going to get there, but the common misconceptions, right, that pastors might have about local nonprofits and how they can be in best use to partner together. So, I think that's a big deal. Like when you're focused on just your one side of the equation as a local church. And I like the example you used. I've heard you talk about that before with like construction, like, hey, we're going to bring.
It's an easy one to go into.
Yeah. We wrestled with that at youth conference. Right. Like, how do you equip thousands of teenagers to go help serve in the local Marion community when we're at Indiana Westland? So those are things that you have to be sensitive to. So I guess,
and understanding that if a nonprofit says, hey, that doesn't really work for us, it's not because they don't want your help. But I actually applaud the nonprofits who are brave enough to say that, because sometimes that's tough to say to someone, especially if you're financially supporting them. I would hope that you would build enough of a relationship where there's not a risk, where the nonprofit's not fearful of a risk of losing your support if they are honest with you about saying, hey, this thing you're doing is really actually not helpful, but we could use your help over here in this other way. And having that open dialogue is so important.
Okay, so go one step further there.
Okay.
From your perspective, again, like what are some of the churches that have done this well in the different organizations you've worked with? So in other words, maybe give some best practices that churches can think about in fostering those authentic relationships that you're talking about, or engaging in those conversations with the local nonprofit leaders. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, I think first is to understand that, but to go back to your point of I've worn a lot of hats and I've had the peek behind the curtain of the churches. So I've seen how very busy our pastors are. There's not a doubt in my mind that every pastor who's listening to this is overworked and has too many things to do and not enough hours in the day. So I think a lot of times this is about releasing your people. And that is what I have seen so often, is when your people in the church are excited about it, those are the partners that I see flourish. So a lot of times I am telling churches, hey, when I can get in front of your people, that is the biggest win. And it's not because I'm trying to sell something or take over your stage, and getting in front of your people, quote unquote, looks different, right? It might be a table in the lobby on a Sunday. It might be stage time on a Sunday. It might be coming and speaking to a specific ministry group that you have. We do a lot of conversations with women's ministry groups for Rahab, but those are not often led by just a pastor, right? That is somebody who gets really passionate about what we're doing and brings them in. So there's one church that I have in mind, who we partner with right now, has been just phenomenal. And they do have a missions pastor who oversees missions and groups within the church, but he then has a missions committee. And on that committee, it's not that all of them are talking about all the things, because I've seen that model too. And that's just tough. It's a lot to cover. But in this particular model that they've adopted, each person of the mission committee takes on one organization or missionary that they are supporting, and they serve as the liaison to them. And I will tell you, for that particular church, and I'm sure it depends on who the volunteers are and what their capacity is, but for that particular one that I'm thinking of, the woman who serves on that mission board calls me every month. She calls, texts, or emails me, but she checks in somehow with me every single month. And she has taken time on the phone to pray with me and pray over me. That has been so encouraging and such a gift. She has connected us with the pastors when it's necessary or beneficial and fruitful, right? So that they can understand us. But she helps organize all of that so that it's not on me and it's not on him, because she understands we're both busy. She has brought us in and connected us with different ministry groups within the church. But she also helps to understand what are the needs of our organization, and then watches within the church to see where we can make those connections, right? That has just been really, really beautiful. I just spoke at a church the other day, and very similarly, there was one particular woman who went to the missions board and said, this is a cause. She actually wanted someone to come in about trafficking. She wasn't even necessarily advocating for us, but when we first came and met with them, that was why. And she really advocated for that. So again, it was about listening to the people and then releasing them to do something about it, right? And so for the volunteers in the church members, how can they serve on that level? Because if it just rests on the pastor's shoulders, oftentimes it doesn't go very far. And that's not a knock to the pastors. That's just, I know how much you've got on your shoulders. You're preparing for Sunday. You've got people in your body who need you to pastor them. You've got 1,000 ministry events and groups and organizations within your own church. So it's hard to add me to the plate, right? I get that. And so, yeah, I think it depends, again, a lot on the size of the church and how you work. But that is so often where I've seen it come to life, is when we are connecting directly with the people in the church. There's another, of course, all of these are coming to mind now. There's another large church that I worked with at one point who they have their set nonprofits that they work with all the time. They review it every year to make sure they want to continue doing that. But then during the year, they pick one Sunday every month that they bring in one of their church partners, and they do a very quick moment in service about it. But then they had us do a table out in the lobby, and then gave us an opportunity to do either they'd kind of given it up to us of how we wanted to use the time, but we could have an event after their services to invite church members to talk about how they could get involved in our organization. Right. So again, that was hardly any time from the stage, but they were getting us in direct connection with their people, so that those people in the church whose hearts were stirred for some work that was happening in the kingdom, could get directly involved with that. And I just think that's so beautiful, because the partnership is between the organization and the nonprofit, but it's not at an organizational entity level. We're actually talking about people, and these wonderful people who have such a good heart and want to do good work in the kingdom, and perhaps are being stirred by the Holy Spirit, being given an opportunity to go direct and get started. And not, too often I think we systemize these things, right? And then there's so many steps to go through. They've got to contact the church office, who's got to contact me, who's got to and we go through all these steps, and we've lost them, right? So that's why I say, so often when we can get in front of your people, the people in your church. And again, that can look in a lot of different ways. But when we have that direct connection, I just think we shouldn't expect pastors to carry all of that load. It's too much. And when we do, we miss the opportunity to release people into the harvest field, right? And I'll tell you, the harvest is ripe and the workers are few. We love it when we can connect with people who are passionate about our work. And I would say that for every organization I've worked with.
I was just thinking as you were saying that, I'm like, surely enough, somewhere, somebody, some pastor is listening to this right now and to you talking about those things. And they're like, boy, I wish that I had some people in my church who are passionate about these things. And so I think you're making a great point that it's not necessarily always, it doesn't need to be on the pastor's shoulders. It's capacity. We're called as pastors to equip the saints to do the work of the
Yes,
ministry. That's
thank you.
scripture,
Yes,
right? So
yes, thank you. Yeah,
when you're thinking in that term, let me kind of speak this, maybe challenge or encourage some pastors here.
yeah.
Oftentimes we put a lot of emphasis on vision, mission, core values, who we are as a local church, right?
Yeah,
Wonderful. I
and
love
you
that.
should.
You should.
Yeah.
But you also can, I think, to raise up some of the needs to help people in your congregation and in your local community discover those passions, the experiences, even that maybe they have a God ordained
Yeah,
moment or a connection with. You're not going to help them do that if you never talk about what the other ministries in your local community are doing.
yeah, for
So
sure.
I know a lot of churches that do this really well, and they'll do, to your point, a mission Sunday.
Yeah,
Or maybe it's, here's the vision of our church, and you do a Sunday, one or two or series a year, and you talk about that. But then to come back and follow that up with, here's how we're going to do that on a local level, on a
yeah,
domestic level, and on a global level, right? And so think Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. How do you do that in those concentric circles, starting in your local community? And so maybe it could be as simple as putting a page on your website of, these are the organizations locally, here's what they do, give a paragraph or a couple sentences even about them,
right.
play a video clip during that series, push them to your social media, like provide links where then your people can go and learn about what these things are right in your backyard, and
Yeah,
then provide pathways and avenues for them to connect. And that, I think, is a huge way where you can develop those partnerships, not by you going and meeting with all
right.
of them, pastor, but by equipping your people to have a vision and to get excited and to provide buy-in.
Yeah,
And then ask them, sure, have them come back to you, to a board, to a committee, where then
right.
they would present and share, here's what we found, here's how we can partner, here's what that could look like.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I love that. I think that's so true. And I think, you started that with a pastor saying, well, I don't know who would be interested in this. You're right, you don't. And they might not even know that they would be interested in this until they hear about it. But giving those opportunities for them to hear about opportunities for kingdom work in your community that are outside of the church walls, right?
Yep.
Can be really
Yep.
beautiful.
All right. I got one more question for you that I think we haven't
Right.
really touched on. Fast forward. Now local churches are partnering with local ministries and other nonprofits, and we're doing it well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you prevent maybe that? How do you ensure that that partnership remains mutually beneficial
Sure.
and avoid being one-sided?
Yeah.
What does that look like from a nonprofit side or perspective?
Well, I think some of it is what we already talked about, right? We said we start that with conversation. Well, it's not a one-time conversation, right? And some of this, I will say, is on both the church shoulders and the nonprofit shoulders. You just said mutually beneficial, right? I want that. Those are the best partnerships that we have, is when it feels like we are being mutually beneficial. And so we can't do that if we stop talking to each other, right? And so again, I think some of that is on us as the nonprofit to maintain the relationship. We should be communicating back to you, especially if you're financially supporting us. What's that impact? What's happening at the nonprofit? What are the updates? What are some great stories of people who have been touched, or houses that have been built, or whatever that cause may be? how is that making a difference, right? So I will say, as a fundraiser, I'm super passionate about that. I think people think that my job is primarily to go out and ask for money. I always think, no, my job is more to go and thank people who give, right? So if somebody gives or partners, I need to be thanking them well. So I think a huge part of it is on us. If there is a church who comes alongside us and partners with us, we need to do that well. By the same token, is also understand that just like your church staff is busy and has too much to do in a day and too many things to do and not enough hours, and stretched thin and wearing a whole lot of hats, welcome to the nonprofit world. Like, that is something we share in common. So there is also like some grace to be had when you're reaching out to us. If it takes me a couple days, I'm sorry, we're trying. But I think there is that, if I have your phone number and you have mine and we can call and check in, that's where, again, going back to that mission board, the fact that person checks in with me every month, and that's not on the pastor, right? But we are maintaining that connection. That's really beautiful, because also then we can talk about what are the new programs that are starting, or where's the growth, or gosh, we're really hurting in this program, or we lost a major support system over here and now this is an issue, or hey, we need to expand this program over here because this is a need we see. We then can fill you in on that if we're having these conversations. But I would say, knowing that, whereas part of how we put things out is our social media and our newsletters and things like that, like, read those, please. We do put a lot of time and effort into those things because it's a good way to keep y'all updated. And so, again, just like no church is the same, no nonprofit is the same, right? So those who are doing it well, if they're putting together a newsletter and providing updates, that's part of how they're trying to communicate with you too. So again, I think that goes both sides. That maintenance of a relationship is on both partners. And us helping you to understand where those new opportunities are. Likewise, if you're starting a new ministry group, if you're starting a seniors ministry, I've actually seen a lot of seniors ministries lately, because that's a group that, as they face retirement, they may not be ready to just go sit by the beach. They're still wanting to be useful to the community and do good work and do things that are meaningful, but maybe have more time now. Right? So if you're starting a ministry like that, how can you connect them with the local nonprofits? How can you bring in the nonprofits who are doing good work in your community but could use some support, and connect the two? And again, how does that then raise up your body and equip those saints and bring more workers into the field? Same thing if you've got a young adult group starting, right? Bring in your nonprofits there. Those are people with a lot of energy, and maybe considering a career. I love talking to young professionals or young adults, people who are graduating college or getting started in their career, who, don't always have a nonprofit career presented to them. Like, maybe they discover a passion that could be a career. But so as you're dealing with those pockets of your church, keeping us in the know, and then us keeping you in the know. But again, all of that goes back to communication and relationship and that type of thing. So, I will say again, I'll say this to my nonprofit friends. If they're nonprofit people listening, I will say there's a member of my team who does a phenomenal job at maintaining these church relationships. I always tell her it's her superpower. And she did it today. Today was her day. About once a month, she goes out and she takes a list of churches who have partnered with our nonprofit, and she just goes and drops in and says hello, right? And sometimes, hey, the church office was closed that day, or the pastor wasn't in, or whatnot. But that has opened so many doors for us, of churches who just really appreciated that we stopped in, right? And left a packet of information. And it shows our willingness to come to you. This isn't just about the church coming to us. This is about us going to you. Again, mutually beneficial relationships where we're both growing and playing into each other's strengths. And so again, this person does a phenomenal job of just going and showing up and saying, I'm here and I would love to chat with you. And so even if it's not in that moment, wow, doesn't that show a church a lot about the fact that we're not expecting you to just come and show up and write a check for us and support our work, but we want to come in and be beneficial to you as well. So if any nonprofits are listening, that's a one little tidbit that we do that has just it's resulted in some really beautiful partnerships, or at least first steps, right? And that's where it starts, is that face-to-face conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Bethany, thank you for being a part of this conversation and helping local churches just think through partnership and what that looks like, and how we can pair up with people that are right in our community. And so maybe some of them you know about, maybe others you don't. Maybe there's things that God's raising to the surface in your local church and in your ministry, or your life groups are wrestling with something and they're looking to serve, or different areas of ministry, your children's, youth, young adults, like you were
Yeah.
saying.
And where are
They
those
can,
people's, where are those people's hearts being pricked? I didn't mention this earlier, but I think, gosh, maybe there's not a nonprofit in your community, but who's doing a certain kind of work. But maybe there's somebody in your church who has a real heart for it. And if you encourage them, just think, honestly, I'm thinking my own organization. We were started by one woman who had a heart for this, right? And so if you fanned that flame for somebody, maybe there would be a nonprofit in 20 years doing incredible work in your community, right?
Yeah.
So, but I think that's such a key part of it, is the conversations with the nonprofits, but also with the people within your own church body. What are they excited about? What is the Holy Spirit stirring in their lives and in their hearts, and praying with them about that? How can they start doing that and pulling together?
So good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bethany, for being a part of this conversation. To
No problem.
our listeners, we mean it. If there's ever anything that we can do as Momentum Ministry partners to be a resource and partner with you and your local church, we're one of those nonprofits too, that we would love to come alongside of you and your local church and help meet needs, to help you thrive, to help you have maximum impact for God's kingdom. Reach out to us. info@buildmomentum.org is our email address. If there's a topic or a conversation or an interview or a question that you would like for us to help facilitate, to turn over some new leaves in mindsets for you, we're in. Let us know. We'd love to do that. So thank you so much, Bethany, for being our guest and helping us think through this and wrestle with these issues. To our listeners, as always, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope you found it to be valuable. And if you did, would you share it with someone else in your network who might enjoy it? Also, would you please go on and subscribe, rate, and review it? That way you don't miss any more, and somebody else will be able to find it too. Also, because we want to be your trusted resource, if you have a question or topic that you would like us to discuss on an upcoming episode, send that to us via email to info@buildmomentum.org, or you can send us a DM on any of our social media platforms. You can find us there at Momentum Ministry Partners. Also, if you need more information on our ministry, be sure to check out our website at buildmomentum.org. Thank you so much, and we hope to see you next time.